Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Stuart Mailer. I am the new chairman of the National Conservation Council. Before we start our business this afternoon, I would just ask everyone to give us a few moments of silence in respect of our former chairman, Mr. McFarland Connolly, who unfortunately passed away a few weeks ago. Thank you. Now, before we start today's agenda, I'd just like to say a warm welcome to our new members. To my left here, we have Miss Lucille Seymour, representing Georgetown. And to her left is Mr. Ian Kirkham, representing Northside. We have one other new member, that is Mr. Steve Broadbelt, representing East End. I believe he is on the Zoom call this afternoon. Could you confirm that, John?
Not yet, sir. He's actually traveling. He sends apologies. He'll be late getting onto the Zoom.
All right, thank you.
Logged in. I just logged in. I'm here.
There you are. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So I understand we do have a quorum, and therefore we could start today's business.
Yes, sir.
Starting with declarations of interests. If any of the members have anything appearing on today's agenda, could they kindly declare that now?
Nothing for me.
Okay, nothing. And also in declarations of interests to the Standards in Public Life Commission by new members must be done within 90 days of your new appointments. Existing members, previous members should already have completed their registration. We could move on to confirmation of the minutes of the last general meeting. John, could you lead through this?
Yes, sir. I can do that. To the members, the last meeting was December last year, before council became incorporate, so it's been a little while. It was held here and broadcast to the public. We went through a number of items, such as regarding invasive species, the judicial reviews that the council was then under. Noted that Cabinet had approved the Asia-Phila Caymanensis Conservation Plan. The Seabird Conservation Plan was then out for public consultation at that time. I just concluded. DOE went through a number of items, such as the stingray handling guidance notes, which the council approved for reissue. Climate change was discussed.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if the secretary could just, yes, go to climate change point 4. Just as a point of clarification, the start of the second sentence that says, but highlights Cayman's inability to access these international funds. Could it be made clear that I highlighted that and that that was not a point of discussion at the actual COP itself, the Conference of Parties?
Okay.
I would love to say that Cayman was actually on that agenda, but this was just my report of those sessions.
Okay, have that correction, thank you. DOE also presented about the environmental advisory boards that were going at that time, such as for the Regen, the Hutland Road Extension, East-West Arterial, Cayman-Brac Marina. Council reviewed a few new matters. The Bayview EIA opinion, was reviewed and ratified. The cement plant EIA opinion was likewise reviewed by council and ratified. There was a CNET license renewal application which council had to consider at the time because of a infraction by the license holder, and council decided to not renew the permit at that time because of that infraction. Like the Stingray guidance notes, the Starfish guidance notes were reviewed and updated. The K-Rock quarry was EIA screening was reviewed by council at that meeting. It's for a new quarry near to Mega Bay Pond, where there's already quarrying in the area, but council knows all the issues around quarrying and the Aggregate Advisory Committee advice on quarries. Council considered the motion that an EIA would be required for this quarry application if CPA was minded to have it go ahead, and that motion was passed. And then, with sort of Christmas greetings from everyone and to everyone, the meeting was adjourned.
Okay, no other comments?
I think we just need a mover.
Okay, could somebody please move that we pass the minutes?
I move that the minutes of the the general meeting on the 14th of December be approved as amended. Lisa's intervention.
I second that. Patricia Bradley.
Patricia seconded. So the minutes are approved?
As amended,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, development matters pending council consideration. The first item, Aqua Bay EIA screening.
Yes, Mr. Chair, just before we get into the presentation, I'd just like to introduce the manager of our environmental management unit, Ms. Loren Dombowski. She's going to take us through several screening opinions that council needs to decide on today. So, Loren, I'm assuming you're online and ready. I saw the presentation come up, so whenever you're ready, please just go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yes, so I do have a presentation, which is a short summary to supplement the full EIA screening opinions that were circulated. So the first one is for Aqua Bay Club, and they have submitted a planning application to redevelop, and our unit has drafted an EIA screening opinion. So the NCC needs to consider whether or not an EIA would be required for this project. They would like to go to 10 stories and have 38 units. They have amenities like a fitness center, pool, and below ground parking. They also have some pools on the roof. And they would like to demolish and infill their existing pool, and they do meet their 130-foot minimum setback requirement. Thanks, John. Can you go to the next page? So this is an overview of what they have proposed. The red dotted line on the side, the C is on the right-hand side, and the red dotted line is 130 feet from the C. And then they've got one single 10-story building on this side. Slide. So we considered aspects such as noise and vibration and transport and climate change, as well as visual impact, and we thought that those areas of impacts would be minor. we did recommend a study of the visual impact of this building because it is 10 stories and a single mass. And we also recommended a study of daylight, sunlight, and overshadowing to look at the impacts on the beach and the surrounding properties from a building of this size. As 7 Mile Beach continues to get these buildings going up to 10 stories, there could be impacts to, well, there would be visual impacts as well as potential daylight, sunlight, and overshadowing impacts. Could you scroll? Thank you. The site is on designated sea turtle critical habitat, and it's one of the areas with the most nesting in Cayman, not just in total, but also among critical habitat. And so for that reason, we're recommending that we direct turtle-friendly lighting and construction fencing on the beach side, and that no heavy equipment be allowed to work on the beach during nesting season. That would be to prevent heavy equipment from running over nests. And we would also like to recommend directing infilling the pool that will be demolished with sand, because that would then essentially restore the area of critical habitat that's occupied by the current pool. And so that they do want to infill it anyway, but we would recommend with sand that they could get from their own site when they begin construction. Next page. Oh, I guess that's it.
Okay.
So overall, we do not believe that an EIA is required to address these impacts. We think that with these conditions, as well as the recommendation of doing a visual impact study, that these impacts are already well enough understood that we wouldn't need further technical study in the form of an environmental impact assessment at least.
Thanks very much, Loren. Mr. Chair, through you, I don't know if any members have questions about the screening opinion.
This is Steve Broadbelt. I would like to see the recommendation of using the lot across the street for additional PV solar power.
Okay. That's something, Mr. Broadbelt, that we can put in our planning recommendations. That would be sort of where that belongs. So that we're happy to take that on board. In fact, we've made a note of that, I think, from last time. So thank you.
Yes, the site across the road will be used for parking, so it does seem like a good location for some more solar panels.
Yes.
Thank you. Understood.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I could just follow on from that, we are in the process of updating our national energy policy, as I understand it. And I just wanted to understand if the Department of Environment gets provided with any kind of energy use of buildings or proposals that come to them for comment, or if it's not the Department of Environment, which agency might be looking at that level of review?
Yes.
And in this instance, would we be able to say whether what is being proposed is more energy intensive than the current development that's there that will be demolished and rebuilt? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, through you. No, we don't get provided with that type of information, Lisa. It would be very helpful. What we tend to do is to look at the scale and massing of development applications that come before us. And if it seems that there are opportunities for distributed generation on site, then we make that, because we're cognizant of the fact that the energy policy sets a target for meeting our electricity demand by renewables, so through renewables. So we think that we have to take every opportunity that is possibly there, and we realize that there may not be the option if there isn't sufficient scope for the renewable energy installation to be included in either the DER or the core provisions that are currently sort of in play. So there is an information gap, and I think it would be a good thing perhaps that the Ministry of with responsibility for energy, our Ministry of Sustainability and Climate Resiliency, or the Planning Department are tasked with looking at the whole question of energy generally especially for large applications that come forward. It's maybe something we can talk about offline and try to move it through the ministries. But it does seem like something that would be useful information to add to what is provided to us when we're reviewing applications.
Absolutely. Thank you for that response, Gina.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay.
So we have a second. We now have to go on to the second one.
We could move on to the second presentation.
Would you all,
Oh,
would
we need
council
to-
like to consider
We need to vote, don't
Voting.
we?
that the EIA is not needed?
Yes, we do need to vote
Right.
on that first one.
Could we kindly have a vote on whether an EIA is needed on this development? My understanding is the DOE's recommendation is that an EIA is not needed. Could I have a vote? Somebody propose that as a position of council?
I can move that we follow the DOE recommendation of no EIA for the Aqua Bay project.
I
Have a
second
second?
that.
Yeah,
Mr. Bradley.
I'm happy to second it, or Patricia did.
Patricia Bradley.
Okay, Patricia, thank you. And
Those four?
we need to vote on this?
Yes,
then?
all those in
Those
favor.
four.
Okay, thank you. All those in favor of an EIA not being required?
In favor, Mr. Chair. Lisa?
In favor, Mr. Chair, Tim Austin. I'm not sure if you can see me.
Mm-hmm.
We just got you. Thanks, Tim.
In favor, Ian Kirkham.
In favor.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to abstain because I was involved in the drafting, so I'm abstaining from voting.
Thank you.
In favor, Frank Rollstone, National Trust for the Cayman Islands.
Any votes against? No, I think that's carried then.
Okay, thank you. John, if you could go back to the presentation.
Chairman? Okay.
Yep. So following the CIAA master planning exercise, they recognize that some of their projects may have environmental impacts and would be required to go through the EIA screening process. So they wrote to us now at this stage while they're still developing plans to request EIA screenings and for some scoping, which is the next step. So these are all the projects that they have asked for advice on. The first one is the relocation of the radar tower. And for this one, no formal screening was needed because it's a fairly straightforward small-scale relocation of a radar tower to an already man-modified site. But there are two other proposals being considered for Owen Roberts Airport, a new general aviation terminal and a runway extension into North Sound. And then for Charles Kirkconnell International Airport, they would like to extend the runway on both sides. And for Little Cayman, they would like to relocate the airport to a new site. You go to the next slide, John. So the first one, under consideration for an EIA screening opinion, so whether or not an EIA is needed, is the development of a general aviation terminal on the site highlighted in red. So it's already within the boundary of the existing airport. It's where the current fire department training facility is. Next slide, John. So they would like to put in a new general aviation terminal, new parking, and VIP facilities, and potentially consider having a dock with a connection to the terminal here. So we considered aspects like air quality and noise and vibration and climate change, and thought that those environmental impacts would be relatively minor. John, could you go to the next slide? Thank you. But we did look and see that there would be mangroves that would be impacted by the new terminal. So in the top left of this picture, in the northwest corner, there's 3 acres of mangroves that would be removed to facilitate this development. They had been cleared in the past, but they've regrown now. And highlighted in green is the mangrove buffer zone. So that's a planning designation, which says that development should only be allowed here in exceptional circumstances. So although the DOE considered that no EIA would be required, we recommended that they restore that area in the mangrove buffer zone, which is about 1.5 acres, that's been impacted, and that would help to offset the loss of 3 acres of mangroves in the remainder of the site.
So my understanding, sorry, Lauren, is that the DOE's position is that an EIA is not needed?
Yes, that's correct. So this is for the general aviation terminal only within the red boundary of the site. We'll talk about the North Sound extension a bit later, but the 2 projects are being pursued separately on different timescales.
And just one minor addition to Loren's presentation, which is that we also did recommend that in the design of the proposed general aviation terminal, they take into account climate change, i.e. sea level rise, the likelihood of inundation of the site during hurricanes and storms, etc. So that, and that is also part of the reason behind the rationale for the basically restoration of the 1.5 mangrove acres of mangrove that have already been disturbed in the mangrove buffer.
Thank you. So could I then have a mover for position that an EIA is not needed?
I so moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
I second it.
Thank you. And do we have a vote on that, please?
I vote yes, Patricia Bradley.
Thank you.
Steve Broadbelt, I would like to see us insist that the mangrove buffer is restored. The current site plan shows a hangar encroaching on that, so it's not just a landscaped area, it's a physical structure. And I think that could easily be a recommendation or condition on no EIA if that was agreed to be restored.
Would that be a direction or a recommendation?
No, we couldn't direct because the mangrove buffer is not a protected area under the NCA, but we would certainly make a very strong recommendation that it is restored and provide the rationale for that restoration.
Thank you. I vote in favor of the recommendation.
Thank you.
And whilst in the Department of Environment, I also support the recommendation in favor.
I support the recommendation.
Thank you.
Frank Rollstone, National Trust for the Cayman Islands. I support the recommendation.
Thank you.
Lisa Hurlston, I support the recommendation.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I think all members have voted, so I'm just going to record my abstention, again, because of my involvement in the drafting.
Okay, thank you. Okay, could we move on then to the Cayman Brac Airport expansion EIA screening?
Great, thank you. So this is the existing airport in Cayman Brac, and there are a few environmentally sensitive areas, both adjacent to the site and in the area. So there's known to be Sister Islands rock iguana nesting nearby, and they're also known to enter into the grassy areas around the runway. It's also on the western end proposed sea turtle critical habitat. So while on Grand Cayman, it's already been designated, it's currently just proposed for the BRAC. The site's also adjacent to a marine reserve, a marine protected area, and the westerly ponds, which are highlighted on the plan there, are an area sensitive for birds, and they also have mangroves, which are a protected species too. Next slide, John. So the proposals for the BRAC are to extend the runway and safety area to the west. And so this would bring it quite close to the proposed critical habitat for turtle nesting. They would like to partially fill in the ponds to the south. The area that's highlighted in black hatching, that's the area that they would like to fill in. They also have some proposals on the lands to the north. That taxiway is proposed for in the future, and they would also like to install a control tower and a weather station on the airport lands to the north. The purple site that's highlighted is the area that was previously proposed for the Degaro airfield. John, could you scroll to the next slide? So on the eastern side, they would also like to construct another runway and safety area on the already filled in area next to the pond, and to realign the road, some of the lot boundaries, as well as do the other infrastructure that you can see depicted on the plans here. Next slide. So this is a bit of a wider context of the BRAC, and this map is from 1958, so it's the earliest aerial imagery that we have. And I wanted to show this map because even though the ponds by the airport have been impacted by the airport and development, there's really not that much wetland habitat on the BRAC. So even though those ponds are not pristine, they're still very important as a stopover site, as some of the only opportunities for wetland birds and wading birds on the BRAC. John, could you scroll? So with that in mind, the recommendation from the DOE is that an EIA would be required. An EIA could be quite focused and relatively narrow, so that it focuses only on the issues that would be very important here. So the ecological impacts, like wildlife management at the airport, the impacts on the sea turtle critical habitat, on rock iguanas and mangroves, but also to look at drainage and water quality, because those ponds are quite close to some of the main tourist areas on the BRAC, and if the water quality in those ponds are impacted and they become eutrophic, that could be a big amenity issue for those properties on the south there. So we wanted to recommend an EIA to really focus on ecology and drainage and water quality. We considered other issues like air quality, noise and vibration, and climate change, but we didn't feel that those were going to be significant effects, and that the EIA could focus on those two topics.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Could the DOE enlighten us as to why the Airports Authority did not include this one as a automatic scoping endeavor, as they did with the other two islands? Was there a particular rationale that was given?
That was actually based on my advice. So for the other two airports, I feel it's completely clear cut that those ones need an EIA. The extension into the North Sounds, relocating the Little Cayman airports, I felt those were almost certain. But for this one, I wanted to go through the potential impacts because I wanted to have a written record of where we thought there would be the likely significant effects. So I recommended to CIAA that they go through the screening process for this airport. But then at the end, I did recommend that an EIA was required when we drafted the screening opinion.
Okay, thank you for that, Loren. Through you, Mr. Chair, I have a few follow-up questions. If I'm understanding correctly, your presentation and the focus of the scope of the EIA on the ecological impacts, drainage, and water quality issues, would that then mean that we would not be seeking in the terms of reference to include air quality, noise, vibration, and other climate change issues that may actually come up as a result of the TORs going out to public consultation? Or would they then have an opportunity to be broadened and to be included as a result of concerns, wider concerns of the community?
They certainly could be widened to expand those. I felt those topics were not enough on their own to warrant an EIA, but those issues are certainly associated with airports and airport expansion. The EAB would draft the scoping opinion, which would outline which topics that would be considered. So certainly they could be expanded. At the terms of reference stage, I think the chapters may be less flexible, but certainly at this stage they are flexible.
Okay, thank you, Loren, for that clarification, because without establishing the full need for the works at this point in time, particularly if a larger aircraft or higher volume of air traffic is anticipated, then I would see all of those additional topics as being quite important, particularly in terms of air quality, noise, and climate change impacts as it relates to not just on adaptation side of things and ensuring that the facilities built are climate resilient, but also on the climate mitigation side of things as we seek in this country to get a grip on our overall greenhouse gas emissions, inclusive of those from the aviation sector. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I have for now.
Thank you.
If I may, just have a comment, Mr. Chair. It's just public safety is obviously a major concern here, and clearly the BRAC's going to have greater aircraft traffic in the future, and so I wonder what's going to happen to the quality of the ponds, the size of the ponds, the critical habitat for turtles, rock iguanas, not to mention the birds that nest there now. All of these will be impacted as the number of aircraft increase, and public safety is a major factor. So I think an EIA is warranted, so that we understand what the impacts will be on the surrounding area and the species that clearly are in need of some conservation.
Yep, thank you.
Frank Rollstone, National Trust. I certainly feel that the issue of the water quality is very pertinent, and in that regard, I would support a limited EA, the recommendation that's been proposed of a limited EIA.
Thank you. So could we then get a vote for whether we accept that an EIA is required for this development?
I'd like to move that an EIA is needed, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Would
And
council
I do
perhaps
also.
like to consider the membership of the EAB at this time and do it as a single vote?
We were actually gonna do all of the airport screening and propose one EAB for all of the projects, if that's okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I got the nomination on that vote. Did
Yes,
you second?
second.
Thank you, Ms. Lucille. And could we therefore get a vote on that, please?
I support
Thank you.
an EIA. Patricia Bradley.
Pierre Foster, I support.
Thank you.
And I
Tim
support-
Austin.
And I support Harrison Bothwell.
Thank you.
Apologies. Tim Austin, I support the recommendation.
Thank you.
Steve Broadbelt, I vote in favour of the recommendation.
Thank you.
Lisa Hurlston, I support the recommendation.
Thank you.
Frank Rollstone, I support the recommendation.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I just would like to record my abstention from the vote because of my
Okay, thank you.
involvement in the drafting.
Okay, that's carried. So the next proposal, Grand Cayman Runway Extension EAA screening. Lauren?
So for each EIA project, the scoping is carried out by an environmental assessment board. So an EAB is a subcommittee of the council. It's chaired by the director and has the deputy director and the director of planning on it, on each EAB. And the other members are based on the likely significant effects. And the EAB involves other government agencies that are normally part of the regulatory processes associated with a project. So each EIA project has its own EAB, which is a great opportunity to get all the government agencies around the table to make decisions around the project. So for the following projects, for the airport projects, John, you can go to the next slide now, thank you. We would need to, well, the NCC would need to appoint an EAB to take the EIA forward. So the red outline is where the CIAA is proposing to relocate the Little Cayman Airport. So the existing one is down in the bottom, just southwest of the, in the southwest of the map that's shown. And they'd like to relocate it into the area highlighted in red. Next slide. So this is what they sent us for review. So it includes 1,199 meter airstrip, a new terminal, and a new airport access road. This is the map that they provided to us. So the whole area is wetland, not just the area that is shown on the left-hand side. Next slide. So they have agreed to do an EIA for that project. Sorry, they have agreed to do an EIA for that project. So the next step is scoping, where you outline the topics that that should be taken forward for further study. Thanks, John. And then the other project is the extension into the North Sound. So this, again, is the image that they provided us with. It's proposed to include runway and safety area as well in the North Sound. And slide. So we think at the DOE that it might make sense to just have one EAB for all 3 airport projects. We would be dealing with the same people and most of the members would be the same anyway. So the DOE and planning are statutory members of all EABs. And we've also suggested adding the Civil Aviation Authority, the Water Authority, and the Coast Guard. We thought the Coast Guard could assist us with navigation and water hazards in the North Sound. And then in terms of water quality, Water Authority would be the best expert on that. And then the Civil Aviation Authority could help us with the regulatory side of the airport's expansion.
So, Don, just help me here. We're voting then on first off, whether an EIA scoping is required for either of these last 2 or on the...
So CIA has already volunteered to do an EIA, so we don't need to go through the screening step that that we just did for the other projects. And so we're asking for the NCC to appoint an EAB, and that the EAB would draft the scoping opinion. So if the NCC appoints members, then we will reach out and contact those members and convene the EAB so that we can discuss scoping.
Okay, I think then I'm looking for a mover for a vote that the NCC support an EAB.
Mr. Chair, can I
Mr.
just
Chair,
ask a
could I ask-
question? Yeah. Could I ask a question of Lauren?
For sure.
Lauren, did you I'm talking about the Little Cayman airports, moving the airports inland. Is there a business plan for explain why the airport needs to be moved, why the existing airport is not sufficient?
I do believe that the CIAA have finished their master planning exercise, which goes into some of it. I haven't seen the full document, and the DOE has not been provided with a business case for it. But I believe that the intention is for the CIA to publish the master planning exercise, which went through the various options that they considered.
So no immediate concerns jump out at you about moving the airport in Little Cayman. I know that an EIA is going to occur, but I didn't hear any comments from you about that.
Mr. Chair, could I perhaps take that question?
Thank you.
Yeah, obviously the Department of Environment is concerned about any increase in the ability to increase the number of people that can access Little Cayman and the availability of goods and services getting onto the island more quickly without having a development plan for the island. I think that anyone who has been around and has seen the way that Little Cayman operates understands that that airport is one of the sort of major control valves on development, both the rate and the scale of it on Little Cayman. And I think that, removing some of that constraint that's imposed sort of by the size of the current airport will have a significant impact on the development potential for the island. And I think that we think, as the DOE, that there needs to be very serious consideration given to putting a development plan in place for the island before we lift the only sort of control valve that we have for development on the island. That is certainly a major concern of ours, and there are obviously environmental issues with the wetland and so forth, and birds. The proposed airstrip site is north of the Booby Pond Nature Reserve, and there are, as you know, frigate birds and red-footed boobies flying in and out of that reserve fairly regularly, and they do fly across the island. It's not just from the south coast, so.
Fly across the proposed site.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
From time to time, Patricia can speak to that, I'm sure.
Well, my concern is we control what type of aircraft goes in, because the amount of birds that are in the air a lot of the time, jet aircraft are going to be a hazard to the passengers because they'll be ingesting into the engines. So many occasions there are thousands of birds in the air.
Mm.
And also it's going to destroy a huge amount of wetland apart from that. And it's going to open up the island to development, which it really does not need. And some way should be found to keep the airport, I feel.
This is Steve Broadbelt. A suggestion: it would be cleaner if it was minuted separately, the Little Cayman Airport. EIA, as it stands right now, it feels like we're not requiring an EIA, even though the developer has volunteered. And I think it leaves an opportunity for them to change their mind. And I'd rather this be minuted and be voted on as a standalone item, if the chairman agrees.
I'm sorry, Steve, could you repeat your question or your comment there?
My comment was that the developer has volunteered to do an EIA, and then my understanding, therefore, was that we did not need to vote on it. But my preference would be to have it documented that this was required, and there was therefore no option for them to change their mind.
Got you.
Mr. Secretary, I don't see a problem in voting on this.
No, sir, I don't think there is.
No. We wouldn't be voting on a screening opinion, but we would be voting on a motion, I guess, to ensure that an EIA was carried out for the Little Cayman Airport.
Okay, so could we have a mover for that?
I move that we.
And I will second it.
Okay, and a vote?
I support Patricia Bradley.
I support Harrison Baldwin.
Support Steve Broadbelt.
I support Tim Austin.
I support that as
Fully support Frank Rollstone, National Trust.
I support Pierre Foster.
I support Lisa Hurlston.
And Mr. Chair, I'm going to support this one as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So does that then bring us back to the EABs?
Yes, thank you. If it seems like I have skipped over the environmental impacts, that's just because until an EAB is appointed to draft the scope, that process will really flesh out what those environmental impacts that require further study will be. So whereas for the ones where we're screening, the DOE has internally done some of that work. For these ones, we haven't done that work yet, but we will once the EAB is convened.
So through you, Mr. Chair, my question was on the Grand Cayman runway extension proposal. And if I am to understand correctly, Is there a proposal at this point in time that the scoping opinion would request alternatives to the design or alternatives to the project itself, particularly for consideration of anything that may not impact the North Sound and extension on the other side of things? And if so, would then the NRA be added to the EAB in that instance?
Mr. Chair, I'll take that question.
Thank you.
Lisa, I think you raise a really good point about the NRA being included if we're going to be looking at alternatives. Obviously, we need to assemble the EAB before we kind of flesh out the scoping opinion and what that might cover. But I take your point that an alternative to an extension in the North Sound would obviously involve extending the runway if that was deemed to be necessary to the towards the road and the Smith Road Oval, etc. So the NRA would definitely be a very key person or entity to have on board to look at those issues. So we could add the NRA to the EAB for the airports generally, understanding that they may only sort of come into play for this one potentially. In a similar way to the Coast Guard, because obviously the Coast Guard wouldn't be involved in looking at issues on the Little Cayman runway unless we were looking at other alternatives that were sea-based, for example, to that. But I agree that the NRA would be a useful addition to the EAB. So maybe, John, if you could put up the slide that had the recommendation for the membership so members could see. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I wonder if, since there's a section of the fire service which is responsible for the airport, or if that would not be a very sensible suggestion to include also the fire service, if it's going to be on the south side or the west side of the airport,
Yes.
coming in from this side.
From the-
Okay.
I think it's the west
Yeah,
or,
from the
or
east.
south. Yeah.
So for this particular,
For that for this particular thing.
we could certainly figure out whether, I guess, Loren, if you could help us think this through, we really would be putting the people here who would have any kind of impact on decisions relating to the proposal in front of us, right? So I'm wondering whether the fire service has a role. Are they just strictly, safety, aircraft safety, people safety? I don't know. Lisa, how do you feel about this? Lisa and Loren, EIA
Sorry.
people.
I would definitely see them as an agency to be consulted, perhaps for their technical expertise, particularly as it relates to them being able to respond adequately to emergencies, either side of whatever is being proposed, whether it's to the east or to the west. I don't know that they would necessarily have to be a full-time EAB member and attend all aspects of the project process if it doesn't really apply to them largely, but that's just my immediate thoughts. I defer to Loren.
I would agree. I know they do play a role in reviewing plans from a safety perspective, but for the project as it is at this stage, that would be quite a bit further down the way, I would think. But we certainly could consult them on a draft scoping opinion to see if they had more to add or wanted further assessment of any aspect to help them make their decisions.
Yeah. Ms. Lucille, would that satisfy your concern?
Not really. I think that the fire service is divided into two. One for the local fire and the other one for the airport itself. If we are going to make a suggestion to bring the planes in from the west, I certainly think, if that's the alternative that Ms. Lisa is speaking about, I certainly think, not just as a consultative agency, but right in the middle of the discussion with NRA, who is roads, but working with an airport. So I'd be more satisfied to see the fire service around the table too, with the other members. Why I say that, I remember when the late Kirkland Nixon was alive, he he had a lot to say about the plane coming in from the west, where we have all the schools, the old people's home, all of those government building, all of those things. So that is why I am sort of sticking to my decision that we should have the fire service around the table with the other group, the other persons nominated.
That would be the section of the fire service that controlled the airport, second.
Yes, Ms. British.
By the same token, Mr. Chair, I wonder for the Grand Cayman one in particular, if hazard management, Cayman Islands would be the agency that would be consulted on climate risk and other vulnerability issues that the airport facility may be facing at present or projected into the future, or whether they would be considered likewise a contemporary to sit on the actual EAB at all times.
Certainly, that is certainly a recommendation, Lisa. I'm just concerned that this will take a lot of time and a lot of commitment from EAB members. Those of us who sit on EABs understand that. A lot of time and commitment. So I'm happy to expand the membership if members want to see that we have the fire service and hazard management included as part of the EAB. We're happy to roll with that.
As well as the NRA?
And the NRA, yes.
The NRA, fire service, and hazard management?
Yep.
And to be clear, I was particularly recommending them for this particular project, but as the EAB seems to be dealing with all three airport projects, I don't know, but I was thinking especially for the Grand Cayman one.
Right.
I think the impacts are different. I don't think we need the NRA really on the Little Cayman or the Cayman Brac
Right.
road. So maybe you could have the EAB appointed and then have sections where people are called for specific airports.
Right.
With addition of maybe an extra member for each, or two members.
Is it worth, Mr. Chair, parceling out Little Cayman from this discussion on the EAB and have a separate EAB established for Little Cayman? It seems the circumstances may be a little bit different, and I do hear Gina, your comments about time and the onerous tasks that sitting on the AB
Yeah.
results in. If members can opt out, maybe that's an option.
Yeah.
Saying that we really don't have a role here in this particular
Yes, I think
discussion.
that would work.
Yes, just, Mr. Chair, through you, so that I can just try to summarize this. The departments on the board there, the entities on the board, obviously DOE and planning are statutory members of the EAB. So we would have Civil Aviation, the Water Authority, and the Coast Guard. Well, Civil Aviation and the Water Authority for
Yes.
the Cayman Brac Airport and the Little Cayman Airport. And then we would add the Coast Guard, Fire, NRA, and Hazard Management for the Grand Cayman extension, is what we're suggesting. Have I got that right?
Yes, I support that.
Okay.
If I may, Mr. Chair, the Little Cayman Airport, I would say definitely the fire service.
Okay.
I've been working with them for many years when I was flying in and out there. And I don't know if it's going to be, the airport is going to be operated by the airport authority, or it's going to be a private strip again. But if it's private, then the fire service plays a very important part in Little Cayman. And that is, they check the runway daily, in fact, several times a day before flights arrive. Because they don't have security there. We have a police officer that come there, like when the flights are coming into direct traffic, because we have to cross the road to get into the parking area by the terminal and out on the way back to departure. So I think the Little Cayman, definitely the fire service need to be included in whatever decisions are made down there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So if we're going to formulate a question to vote on, then it would be, would be that the EAB would consist of the statutory members, the Civil Aviation Authority, the Water Authority, and for the Grand Cayman Airport, it would also include the Fire Service and the Coast Guard and Hazard Management.
Yeah.
And NRA.
And the NRA.
NRA.
Yes, sir.
And for Little Cayman, we would also add the Fire Service.
Okay, and also adding Fire Service for Little Cayman.
Yes.
So could we have a mover of that?
I move that we accept the recommendation.
Second.
Thank you.
Steve Broadbelt, I vote in favour.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tim Austin, DOE, I vote in favour.
Thank you.
In favor, Ian Kirkham.
Thank you.
In favor, Lisa Hurlston.
Thank you.
In favor, Pierre Foster.
Thank you.
In favor, Frank Rollstone, National Trust for the Cayman Islands.
Thank you.
In favor, Lucille Seymour, Georgetown.
Thank you.
In favor, Gina Petrie.
Thank you. And I think that's everybody, but any against? Okay, that's carried then.
Mr. Chairman, sorry.
Yes.
Before we go on, I've had a request to ask the members who are on Zoom to please speak as as loud into your mic as possible, just so that the audience watching and listening can hear what's being said. Thank you.
Okay, then we're moving on to the Scots after the fact quarry extension, Cayman Brac EIA screening.
Okay, thank you. So this is the West End Quarry in the Brac. And the purple color outlines the area of an after-the-fact planning application. So the Scots have applied for after-the-fact permission to quarry the area in purple. At the same time, they've also applied to extend the quarry south. That's the area that's in yellow. So, so they have these two planning applications. The quarry is very close to Saltwater Pond Trail, which is the trail that runs along the eastern end of the quarry. And when there is blasting at the quarry, there's fly rock that impacts the trail, and so it's often closed to the public when they are quarrying. Could you go to the next slide? And during one of our site visits, we found evidence that this fly rock is physically impacting the trail. You can see that these rocks have actually hit and damaged the boardwalk that's included there, as well as the potential safety and human life risk from this, the fly rock coming from the blasting at the quarry. Could you go to the next page? And this is the view from the trail now. So it used to be relatively screened from the public's view as they were walking along the trail. But now as they've moved closer towards the trail, you can see that you can see right into the quarry, basically. And so given that Saltwater Pond Trail is a tourist amenity and the boardwalk was put in with district administration funds, and it's highlighted on a lot of promotional material for the BRAC. This is a major amenity impact. It affects your perception of the trail if when you're walking by, you're looking into an active quarry. Could you go to the next slide? And it does look like they are proceeding with the extension that they've applied for, even though they haven't been granted planning permission. So this is showing the yellow area. Basically, there already has been clearing at the top, and it looks like they're moving southward anyway, regardless of the fact that they haven't received planning permission yet. Yeah, we can go to the next slide, John. Thank you. So this is a tricky one because you don't need further technical studies to identify that this is impacting the trail. We don't really think that an environmental impact assessment, which would involve studying what's happening here, would really provide that much more information than what can already clearly be seen. There's no real practical benefits to doing an EIA for an after-the-fact quarry. Any impacts that would have been predicted have already occurred. So the DOE has recommended that an EIA is not required, not to say that there aren't serious concerns at the site, but that there aren't technical studies needed to address them. It does look like there are impacts to Saltwater Pond Trail, and that the lack of regulatory involvement is causing adverse impacts, and that can result in degradation of the trail for tourism, as a historic site, and as a public amenity. Environmentally speaking, we've recommended that the Development Control Board secure a dust management plan and require a noise assessment to evaluate the levels of noise. And the DCB would need to take into consideration the serious adverse impacts occurring to the trail, but that an EIA would not be needed for those considerations.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Loren, for that presentation. I have a couple of questions. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Firstly, in terms of the breach of planning permission, the after the facts works, I suppose, that's being considered, are there any legal proceedings that you anticipate would take place that would perhaps complicate any type of recommendation for mitigation or compensatory measures from an environmental standpoint?
I think that since it falls within the realm of planning, that any sort of legal proceedings would need to come from the planning department.
Yeah, and I was going to say that our law does not allow us, the National Conservation Act, does not allow the council and the DOE on behalf of the council to sort of make any directions or take any enforcement action. Because the offense here is one that has occurred under the planning legislation. So I don't know whether the planning representative who's online has any further information on this, but we're certainly not aware of any legal action being pursued by the planning department.
And Lauren, could you just clarify for me that whether or not there are any measures in place to actually protect the public walking that trail when blasting is taking place at the moment?
I believe that there's a planning condition that the public trail is closed when they are blasting. And although I haven't surveyed it, I have anecdotally heard that that doesn't always occur. And there are also, I suppose, considerations around public rights of way if it is closed at certain times.
Thank you.
So through you, Mr. Chair, thank you, Gina, for that. My question wasn't so much in terms of the NCA having the provisions to enforce this activity. It was more to do with whether anything coming through either legal proceedings or through the after the fact application, which presumably the DOE is commenting on behalf of the NCC, if any sort of compensatory mitigation could or should be recommended at this point, or whether that would be considered somewhat null and void if legal recourse in a different direction was to be taken. And it is somewhat linked to my second question about the new application, the extension. In consideration of it, would we be recommending any sort of compensatory measures for that in terms of purchase of similar type of habitat elsewhere on Cayman Brac for the loss of those resources, same acreage or perhaps a multiplied factor, as well as if the Aggregate Advisory Committee has actually opined on either of these two applications, the after the fact and the request for extension, and whether there is in fact actually a need for the extended portion of the quarry. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So on the first question about the mitigation or the compensatory, any kind of recommendation for some kind of compensatory purchase or exchange, of land, whatever, that is something that we could consider recommending, but that would be a recommendation at this point from the NCC via the DOE. So we could definitely add that to our planning recommendation. In terms of the second point that you made, Lisa, which now I've completely lost my train of thought. Sorry. So can you just remind me? I should have made a note on that. That's
fine. Sorry, it was kind of a two-part one in that A has the Aggregate advisory committee.
Yes, aggregate yes.
Right, opined on either of the two applications.
Yes.
And again, in terms of the extension side of things, would there be compensatory mitigation contemplated on that side if we were to go forward?
Right. So the AAC has met with the applicant. They have, to get a better understanding of exactly what transpired with the after-the-fact situation, what pertains in terms of the supply of aggregate on Cayman Brac, et cetera, and have obviously are writing up or have provided their input to the CPA, because the AAC is a committee of the CPA. So in terms of the quarry itself, the AAC was more focused on looking at any kind of closure plans and requiring the applicant to come forward with a closure plan that would involve something useful instead of just the scar of the quarry at the end of the quarry's life. I think the recommendation for compensation probably sits better in the DOE's input to planning on behalf of the NCC. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I certainly agree with it being somewhere, and if it should come from us, then I fully support that.
Okay, thank you.
You'll forgive me for saying, because I know it's not part of the NCC's remit, but the subject of the Saltwater Pond Trail, this trail is a historic trail. It is how many people survived the 1932 storm by crossing through this trail to get to the south side of the island, including Rebecca's Cave. And I think from a National Trust perspective, it is an absolute disgrace to see our built heritage destroyed, and I just wanted to publicly state that.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
So Gina, could I perhaps ask you to propose a question that the council could vote on regarding this matter?
Sure. I'll give it my best shot. So what I'm proposing is that council accept that although there are significant issues surrounding the proposed after-the-fact quarry expansion, and as well as the smaller request to expand the quarry to the south, that there doesn't need to be an EIA carried out to understand the implications or the impacts of those actions, but that the Development Control Board, that the DOE, on behalf of the NCC, recommend to the Development Control Board that they carefully consider the serious impacts on the Saltwater Pond Trail as a tourism product and public amenity, as well as historic site, and the impacts on the terrestrial ecology, and that they require the applicant to secure a dust management scheme for the part of the application that would be ongoing, so the expansion to the south, as well as to carry out a noise assessment to assess potential levels of noise generation for the people and the communities to the south of the quarry that would be impacted. So that's long, but it is a lot of information to consider. So we're basically saying no EIA, but that the DCB be alerted to the fact that they have to carefully consider the serious impacts on the Saltwater Pond Trail for all the reasons I went through earlier, as well as the fact that they need to secure a dust management scheme and a noise assessment for the expansion of the quarry.
Thank you. So could we have a proposer of what Gina just said?
This is Steve Broadbelt. I had one more question.
Sure.
as the National Conservation Council, is there anything else left on the table, what we can do to conserve this trail? Mr. Frank from the National Trust, maybe, if you know of anything, or the director for DOE, are we leaving anything that's not considered?
The only way, Steve, that we could have a directed condition of approval or a directed to direct anything in respect of this application would be if the trail formed part of a protected area or was the subject of a conservation agreement. Unfortunately, it is neither. So we are left, as we are with, in the position as we are with sort of 90% of the planning applications that we look at, we're left to basically making recommendations to the DCB.
And Gina, just to confirm, we're not dealing with any Part 1 species in terms of the extension proposal?
Yeah, not that we're aware of, Lisa.
Thank you.
Steve, to answer your question from a National Trust perspective, we are allowed to object on the basis of our adjacent land holdings, which are not affected by actually what is being applied for. I think the bigger concern here is the fact that the Saltwater Pond Trail, as far as I know, is a public access. It belongs to the people of the Cayman Islands. It is the people of the Cayman Islands who are going to suffer as a result of this area being destroyed. And I think that that is where the National Trust position will come in. And as such, we have issued our objections to this already, and therefore I will abstain from the vote in this regard as we have another matter pending.
Mr. Chairman, would it be possible to clarify who owns the land that the trail runs across?
Laura?
Sure. So the trail is technically a road parcel. It doesn't have a block and parcel of its own, so that's Crown owned. But the land on either side is both owned by Scott Development Corporation.
So there's no risk of that getting quarried and after the fact application came in?
Yes, there is. They do intend to quarry right across. I've been dealing with them for a lot of years, and they at one stage talked to me about moving the trail and giving us another trail so they could quarry right through. So, I mean, until we have a development plan for the BRAC, this sort of issue is impossible.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, through you, would like to second what Patricia has said. I mean, so many of the issues that we're dealing with stem from the lack of proper planning regulation on the sister islands. And, from the very onset of the National Conservation Law, when we were taking this out to the public many, many years ago, I remember trying to explain to people who were sort of questioning the provisions of our law, that our law could not possibly fill the gap that is needed to be filled by proper development plans and proper planning legislation. And that remains the case today. We don't have a development plan for either of the sister islands, and obviously they're desperately needed.
Thank you. So I think we're back to trying to vote on the council on whether we agree that an EIA is not required for this, but dust control and noise and so forth all be considered by the Development Control Board in reviewing this matter.
And I would just like to add that Lisa's suggestion of some kind of compensation also be provided for the DCB and the review that the DOE would submit on behalf of the council.
So could somebody kindly propose that to the council, that we vote on this, whether we are in favor of that?
I propose,
I'm in favor of that.
I'm sorry, I heard Patricia proposing, somebody else spoke at the same time?
Harrison.
Harrison. So that was a proposal and a seconding?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
did I hear Miss Patricia said that they were planning to utilize the second part of the property?
I heard that, yes.
Yes, well, that's being the case, then we may have to ask for an EIA to see exactly how their proposals and what exactly they're going to do. That might solve the issue if we get them to, not solve, but at least.
Historically, Ms. Seymour, through the chair, they're going to go south first before they cross. It doesn't suit them to cross for over a period. I think that what we're covering now is sufficient, and this should be monitored by DOE so that when they take their next chunk of quarrying without permission, we then take that up for an EIA.
So in other words, you are not agreeing with me then, Ms. Patricia?
I think there isn't a plan for it at the moment.
Yes, to force their hand.
Beg your pardon?
We would then see what their intentions are and force their hand to do a proper planning, and also the Cayman Brac board to look at it seriously.
Mr. Chair, through you, I think part of the difficulty will be that we don't have a proposal to
Yes.
examine, to screen for the EIA. So it would be difficult to make a recommendation on the basis of no proposal. We have to see what's coming forward so that we can then make some professional judgment about the likely significant impacts of what's being proposed. But because we're not sure whether anything is going to come forward, and B, if it is coming forward, what it will include, I think until that time, unfortunately, we're limited to looking at what we have in front of us in terms of the screening opinion and our recommendations around that.
And there's no provision for us to vote on looking rather forward, looking in the rearview mirror at what they have already mined without planning permission, and to take reasonable projections based on that. What I'm seeing there is that they have mined a whole lot of quarry that they had no planning permission to quarry, and that would strongly suggest to me that they're going to continue, as Patricia suggested, right across the trail when it suits them to.
Mr. Chair, Steve Broadbelt, if we have little options on restricting this, at least if we could add to the recommendation, the yellow expansion zones remains outside of the red buffer line. There's a small area there that encroaches the red buffer line. If that is accurate, then I would recommend that that's included in any feedback that's provided to the Development Control Board. Thank you.
Thank you. And if Laura's still with us, just want to confirm that the red line to the left of the salt trail is the edge of the buffer zone?
Yes, that's right.
And
Yes, so those are 3 buffer lines there, I think 200, 400, and 600 feet. So our recommendations would be that they do not go within 200 feet of the ponds, or sorry, of the trail, with that yellow section there.
Yeah.
But they have all, the bit you could see, Lauren, is that pink. They've already blasted that, haven't you? That's why you can see into the quarry.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it is very close, right where the mouse is hovering now. It's very close, and they have cleared some of the vegetation on the top, so it's even more visible.
Mr. Chair, through you, I was just wondering if Ms. Gina could say whether the issue of a more future-focused plan and the potential to require or request, I suppose, an EIA could come from the AAC, or whether their terms of reference prohibit them from making such a recommendation or request.
Yeah, I don't think that it would strictly be prohibited. Certainly not in requesting a plan for the future expansion of the quarry. So that is something that I can take back to the AAC. In fact, I know that the AAC, I believe that the last time we met with the applicant, the representatives from Scott's Development, there was discussion about their future plans, although they didn't sort of have anything drawn or anything concretely proposed. So I think that's a reasonable suggestion, Lisa, is that we ask the AAC whether they could secure some type of future plan from the applicant. I mean, really, it should be planning. Sorry, I keep coming back to this, but it really ought to be planning that's asking for this kind of thing. The fact that there's been this much quarrying outside of their planning permission and no action has been taken thus far is astounding to me. But yeah, I mean, I do believe that the AAC, as a committee of the Central Planning Authority, could make that recommendation. That would be within their remit to ask for a future plan.
I mean, perhaps they could think about a full, strategic EIA in terms of all quarrying in the 3 islands, because as we know, much of the product that's excavated from the sister islands or Cayman Brac in particular comes to, feed Grand Cayman's development. I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah.
So to look at all of the quarrying activities and all of the remaining supply that's that's under license, under permitted conditions to whatever depth each of the quarries are at now, dry quarries as well as wet quarries. That might be something that we just need to undertake in this country at this particular time, especially since the last time I suppose it was done was the 2002 CH2M Hill report, which actually was the genesis for the Aggregate Advisory Committee being a subcommittee of the CPA, and the Aggregate Advisory Policy that they followed since then, which may need some revision.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, through you, I agree, Lisa, that is definitely a possibility, because the AAC has been discussing, for example, updating the supply and demand calculations, for the want of a better word, or estimations, maybe better, that sort of inform the AAC's views going, as they consider each quarry application, and they're meant to inform the CPA's views. So putting that reassessment in the context of a strategic EIA would take care of a number of issues. And I think that could be another recommendation coming from the council to the AAC. So I'm happy to take those both forward, asking for the future plan, but also considering a strategic environmental impact assessment for quarrying and aggregate supply in general. Obviously, there are funding implications for that the would have to be sorted out. But as a recommendation, I think I could take it from council to the AAC if that is something that council is minded to have happen.
I support
Thank
that.
you, Ms. Gina. Mr. Chair, does that indicate that what Mrs. McKenzie said, that Ms. Gina we would have to do a new motion, inclusive of what Ms. Gina just said, so that it can be minuted properly, and we can then vote on it? Because I think that is more, whilst I might not have used the appropriate information as Ms. Gina did, I think we've come down to the exact thing I wanted to be done. So I would think it needs a new motion by Miss Lisa.
Two motions? It's going to get complicated.
No, yeah, we can do it. If I might, Mr. Chairman, Chair,
Yes.
Council. So the new first motion, before Council gets back to the original motion, would be that DOE should ask the Aggregate Advisory Committee and Department of Planning to secure a future plan from the applicant for the quarry, noting the level of activity outside of planning permission which has occurred so far. The other half of that motion would be that a strategic EIA for all quarrying and aggregate use in the country, taking into account movement of aggregate between islands, be put forward from the NCC to the AAC by
Yeah.
DOE.
That's one motion.
Yeah.
So I think we should vote on that, and then we need to vote on this particular screening opinion, is my view.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
And to be clear here, the NCC is only voting on us whether or not this needs an EIA.
Right, the application in front of us, whether
And-
that needs an EIA.
And the application, which includes, as Mr. Broadbell pointed out, continuing to mine within the already agreed with the National Trust no mine zone.
Yeah.
Which we don't have a position on, as that's not NCC's
Yeah.
agreement.
Yeah. But we will, in our recommendation to planning, with respect to that yellow zone, which is the expansion,
Yes.
we will strongly recommend a condition of approval be that the quarrying remain outside of that 200-foot line, the red line that you can see to the east of the yellow extension area. That would be a condition that we would recommend to planning, in addition to the noise assessment and the dust mitigation scheme
Okay, thank
as
you.
well.
So I've forgotten the wording of your motion.
Sure. It would be, so Part A, the Department of Environment should ask the Aggregate Advisory Committee or Planning to secure a future plan from the applicant for the quarry, noting the level of activity outside of planning permission which has occurred so far. B, a strategic EIA for all quarrying and aggregate use in the country, taking into account movement of aggregate between islands, be recommended to the Aggregate Advisory Committee. Or the
The
Aggregate
EIA.
Advisory Committee be recommended to engage the strategic EIA.
Sorry, Patricia, what did you say?
No, that's fine. No, it's okay. Can I propose that? motion?
Propose A and B.
Yes.
Okay, yes.
And second, Mr. Chair.
Okay, seconded.
Lisa.
That's Miss Lucille. There was an aye.
Yes,
Yes,
Yes.
Mr. Chair, Ian Kirkham.
Other votes?
Aye. Aye.
Yes.
I support.
Steve Broadbelt, yes.
Thank
in
you.
favour.
Tim Austin, yes.
Thank you.
Pierre Foster, yes.
Thank you.
Has everybody else voted?
And Frank said he was abstaining, I think,
Abstaining, right.
from the vote on this.
Okay, I think I can vote on this motion. I will abstain on the one to do with what we drafted. So I vote yes for the motion just proposed, Gina Petrie.
Thank you. Any nays? I think that's everybody. Nope. Okay, carried.
So now we need to vote on this.
And now we need to vote on.
On the screening
On the
opinion.
screening opinion.
So just for clarification, would the motion more or less be that an EIA is not required?
Correct.
Correct.
Then I would so move.
So, yeah, sorry. Ian so moved.
Actually, and Harrison and Patricia also already moved this motion essentially.
Yeah.
We got.
That was a while ago.
Yes.
Thank you.
I support, Mr. Chair, Lisa.
Thank you.
I support.
Thank you.
Tim Austin, I support the recommendation.
Thank you.
Ian Kirkham in
Steve Broadbelt.
favor.
so I support as well.
Thank you.
Yes, Steve Broadbelt.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to abstain because I was involved in drafting
Okay.
Gina
Thank you.
Petrie.
Okay. Are we ready to move on? So, K Rock Quarry, Grand Cayman EAB appointment. Lauren?
Okay, John, could you go back to the slides? So, in December of last year, the NCC endorsed a screening opinion for a quarry in Grand Cayman, saying that an EIA would be required. So the applicant has now requested an EIA scoping opinion. That's the next step where you outline the topics that will be considered. So to draft that, we would need another EAB. This is the quarry here, it's outlined in blue. It has an area of 66 acres. And one of the key reasons why it required an EIA was because of the impacts to Meager Bay Pond, which is a protected area, one of Cayman's oldest and longest protected areas, which is highlighted in red. And then the proposed east-west arterial is also shown just to the north of that for some context. So by the quarries in the surrounding area are currently impacting Meager Bay Pond, and the addition of this quarry as well may impact the hydrology and cause Meager Bay Pond to degrade. So for that reason, the NCC has required an EIA, and the DOE is putting forward that the DOE and planning as statutory members would be on the EAB, along with the Water Authority and NRA.
So this matter was already debated and discussed and agreed on by the NCC, so I think we're just focusing now on the makeup of the EAB.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, may I have somebody propose that, please?
I don't know whether I'm allowed to as the chair of the EAB, but I will. Lisa, do you?
I can propose. I was just trying to think if there was any other technical expertise required, but I can propose.
Yes, go ahead.
May I comment on, I think Mr. Lauren just said that the Meager Bay Pond was part of this, right?
Yeah.
And that comes under
The NCA.
NCA.
Protected area.
It's a protected area under our
Protected
law, yes. Yeah.
I'll second it.
Okay, thank you. And voting on this?
I support, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
I support.
Thank you.
I support Alison Boswell.
Thank you.
I support as well.
Thank you.
I support.
Support Stephen Broadbelt.
Thank you.
I support Tim Austin, Department of Environment.
Thank you.
I also support Mr. Chair, Gina Petrie.
Thank you.
I support Frank Rollstone, National Trust.
Thank you. So I think that's everybody.
So,
Mr. Chair, sorry. Can it just be recorded that I abstain as there is interest?
Thank you. All right, and the NCA procedures for control of stray and feral cats by the public. We have another presentation from the DOE.
yes, Mr. Chair. For this one, I would like to introduce the manager of our terrestrial resources unit, Mr. Fred Burton. I know he's in the room with Tim. I just saw him, so he's ready, hopefully, to just take council through the rationale for putting forward these procedures, why we need them, etc. Fred, are you ready?
Yes, I am, Gina.
Okay, thank you.
I hope you can all hear me clearly. I'm going to have to point my face to the speaker in here, so I'm not ignoring you all. So, Council, as you are aware, the Cabinet passed regulations, alien species regulations, under the National Conservation Act late last year. Since that time, we at the Department of Environment, but also the Department of Agriculture, and some of the animal charities have been getting questions from the public about how these regulations relate specifically to stray and feral cats, which are quite prevalent in residential areas. Now, of course, the DOE is working on feral cat control in environmentally sensitive areas, and we already have procedures in place approved by council for that work. But when we start talking about stray and feral cats in residential areas, it's quite a different thing. And there's some concern that if this isn't clarified in some way, there are concerns that the public, members of the public, may be inclined in some cases to use less than humane methods to deal with problem cats. I don't know how serious a problem that really is, but anyway, there's a sense that we need some guidance. So these procedures that are before you now are meant to clarify what members of the public can do legally within the alien species regulations and within the parameters of the Animals Act. If they want to do something about trapping and removing stray or feral cats, you know, from their backyards or wherever it may be. These procedures basically lay out that cage trapping is really the only acceptable option for the public. And the way they're written, they're interfacing with an order which is pending with Cabinet at the moment. And as I believe it's on the next Cabinet agenda, to establish a pound at the Department of Agriculture for stray and feral cats. That would operate very much the same way that the dog pound operates, so that if somebody traps a feral cat in their backyard, they can take it to the pound, and it will be held at the pound for a period of time in case it turns out to be somebody's pet, in which case it can be reclaimed. If it isn't reclaimed, then it would be humanely euthanized. For that reason, we're requesting that NCC approve these procedures to come into effect on such date that the pound is actually established by Cabinet. We're expecting this to happen very, very soon. I think that's really the rationale. If anybody's got any questions, I'd be very happy to answer them.
I have a comment. Ian Kirkham. Fred, if I can just ask you a question about the hours of operation of the proposed pound for cats. Currently, it says in the draft procedures that cats may be submitted to the pound on Grand Cayman between 2 and 1 and 3:30 and 4:30 on weekdays. In the BRAC, it may be during working hours during the weekdays. Is there any? This seems a little restrictive, I think, in terms of what if someone does trap a cat, they have to do some careful planning as to when to drop the cat off at the pound at DOA. Is there an opportunity? I know that the Director of Agriculture can, at his, it's his privilege to change those hours. Is there any option for the procedures as drafted to have somewhat larger, broader hours of operation?
Ian, I share your concerns. The hours as they currently stand are the hours that the pound operates. It's the same for dogs or a cow for that matter, because they have their animal welfare officers and they have other duties, and they can't be just standing by hoping somebody might bring an animal one day. So they are restricting the hours at the moment to the hours that the animal welfare officers are actually going to be at that site. We are expecting to meet with the Director of Agriculture sometime in the fairly near future to talk a lot more about this. There's a need for the animal welfare staff to be more familiar with what's being proposed, and the questions. There are a lot of questions about the actual operation of this pound because it's a new thing. The dog pound's been operating for a long time, but now pound for feral and stray cats is a whole other dimension. And I think Mr. Critchlow is quite concerned about the staffing implications. It's an open question whether the DOE should or could assist in any way, and if so, in what ways and to what extent. So I think we need to have a discussion about it, and I agree that these hours are quite restrictive, and I would certainly like to see them wider. But as you say, it is ultimately the whole way this pound operates is in the full control of the Department of Agriculture.
Thanks, Fred.
Mr. Chair, Steve Broadbelt. Could Fred elaborate on if this is solely reliant on the general public to trap and carry the cats to the pound, or is there something similar to what Department of Agriculture is doing? And then also, second part of the question, is there any part of this that includes adoption plans for suitable cats? Or has that not been decided yet? And the 2 questions.
Yeah, okay. The first one, well, the last one first, should we say, the adoption thing. Typically, an honest-to-God feral cat is a very, very difficult thing to adopt, and the Humane Society would be the first people to tell you that they are having a great deal of trouble getting any cats adopted. To say there's an oversupply is the understatement of the year. So the prospect for any of these cats getting adopted is extremely low. Typically, if they're so unwanted that they're brought to the pound, they're probably not going to get adopted, and there's certainly no mechanism inherent in these procedures to put these cats forward for adoption, because if they were in a cage and there was a hope they could get adopted, I don't think they'd end up in the pound. In terms of how the animals get into the pound, at this point in time, these procedures are intended to address a public demand. We don't know how big the public demand is, but certainly we're experiencing there is a demand. People are calling us up and saying, what can we do? I've trapped a cat, where do I take it? And there isn't anywhere to take it until this pound starts operating. Humane Society can't take it. Feline Friends generally can't take it. It's a bit of a no solution thing, so we're looking for that solution. But the Department of Agriculture is not resourced to go out and start trapping feral cats. We are working on a feral cat suppression in Little Cayman Island wide, and we're certainly working on feral cat suppression around the nesting colonies of brown boobies on Cayman brack. But we're not obviously mandated to start working on feral cats in built-up areas. And that, at this point in time, it's really a matter of what can the public do, and there isn't any government initiative to go out and start trapping them.
Thank you for the answer. But just in the sense that somebody's domestic cat could have been trapped by accident, as the guidelines stated, that they would have a time frame that could be claimed. But if they're not claimed, surely then an adoption process could kick in. If the cat's got a collar on and has a clip in its ear, then clearly it's not feral, but hasn't been claimed. Is that where some of the animal charities would step in?
We could have a discussion with the animal charities, but I mean, literally, we were on Little Cayman with a member of the Humane Society present, and we had highly adoptable kittens that we trapped, and the Humane Society basically refused them because they have not got the capacity. I think it's an admirable idea that we should try and get these animals adopted out, but I think it's just unrealistic.
And but the creation of the pound, isn't that in itself creating capacity?
Capacity to hold maybe 6 or 9 cats. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. That's really where we're at this point. If it turns into a massive operation, then perhaps, yeah. But yeah, I think we have to be realistic about this.
Great. Thank you for your presentation.
You're welcome.
Fred, it's Ian. I just have another question. Do not our feral cats come from domestic house cat populations that are basically unwanted?
Yeah, that's how it started for sure.
And the Humane Society has a surplus of cats available for adoption. But because they're not generally wanted, that surplus exists or persists.
That's my understanding, yeah.
Okay.
we're good to vote on that, Stuart.
Motion.
I received an email earlier from John. We had a question from a member of the public on this matter.
Yes, sir. A member of the public, seeing the council's agenda advertised, did send in a comment query on this, which was circulated to members. I can go through it if you want, or council can just acknowledge its receipt. Which would you prefer?
If you wouldn't mind going through it.
Yes, sir. So like I said, this email was from a member of the public with some concerns on this, particularly in the section, procedures for control of stray and feral cats by the public, as it is currently written. I am concerned about the very limited number of hours that the pound is open, i.e. only 2 separate hours per weekday, not open at all on evenings and weekends. What happens if a cat is trapped at 5 p.m. on a Friday? Will that cat have to stay in that cage until Monday noon at the earliest? That would be 6 to 7 hours. Will the trapper give it food and water and access to litter tray during those 6 to 7 hours? In this heat, I would hate to think of any animal being held in a cage for 6 to 7 hours. There is nothing written in these procedures to require the trapper to provide the cat with food and water, just that trapping and subsequent treatment to be done in a humane fashion. This can be open to interpretation and is not clearly explained. Will the DOA agent receiving the trapped cat look for a microchip? And if there is a microchip, would the agent make several attempts to contact the owner? This is not addressed in these procedures. Trapping of team of companion cats should be avoided. My concern is that an unscrupulous person who just doesn't like cats is now allowed to trap cats. Would this unscrupulous person give the pet back or deny any knowledge of it? In my opinion, the outlined procedures in this document bring up too many unanswered questions, and I am uncomfortable with this document as it is written. My suggestion: to solve the feral cat issue, perhaps the government should initiate a program where all cats on the island can be sterilized at no cost to the owners. Feral cats could be sterilized, then released. If all cats were sterilized, this would really reduce or even eliminate the number of feral cats. Pet cats would not be having kittens, owners would not be dumping kittens in vacant lots, and the Humane Society would not be full.
Thank you.
I could try and answer some of this. I think it's important to note that there are a lot of opinions about this subject. The pound opening hours we've already covered, and this is something that we do need to discuss. We could elaborate these procedures and talk about feeding and watering, or we could keep them general and say humane is humane. That's up to council. If you wish us to spell this out in a lot more detail, we can. The microchip question is not as simple as it seems. A cat with a microchip is only traceable to an owner if the owner has registered that microchip with some service that is online that you can actually interrogate. There are lots and lots of cats out there with chips that don't trace to anybody. And we know this from Little Cayman. We have chipped cats turning up in our traps that have been living in the wild. Some of them have ear notches and are still fertile. They're pregnant females with ear notches and microchips that are not owned by anybody as far as anybody can trace. So yeah, we would look for, the DVA will look for a microchip. And if the owner can be traced with that microchip, then absolutely. I would like to think, these are all things we need to discuss, that if there's a microchip identified in the cat and nobody knows what it is, that perhaps could go on, on a website somewhere that an owner could check. But it isn't as simple as a microchip gets you straight to an owner. Unscrupulous people who trap someone else's cats are guilty of theft. At the end of the day, we can't stop unscrupulous people from being unscrupulous, other than pointing out that that's a criminal act to basically steal somebody's pet like that. Sterilization of the entire cat population on Grand Cayman or on the Cayman Islands, unfortunately, is completely impractical, given that the great majority of the cats aren't in human ownership. They're just running around in the wild, in the wilderness. Releasing of feral cats is illegal. It's illegal under the National Conservation Act, and it's illegal under the Alien Species Regulations. And the reason is that released cats still hunt and still cause massive environmental damage. So basically, this is a trap neuter release proposal, and it's been fairly clearly established in scientific circles and in our review within DoD that the trap neuter release does not work in the situations that we're working in here in Cayman. So I mean, these aren't bad points in this letter, but they are matters mostly we've addressed. And I think the real question for Council arising from this is whether you want us to elaborate some of the language where we talk about, must be humane. Do we need to be explicit about providing food and water, or is that implicit in the word humane?
This is Ian Kirkham. I, for one, find the draft procedures exceptional in their efforts to be humane with these animals. And that seems to me one of the underlying principles here, trying to treat abandoned or feral cats in a humane way. Sterilizing and releasing a feral cat, in my view, is inhumane. You're sentencing that animal to a cruel death. We can't, I'm just going to the end of the public comment, we can't really prevent people from abandoning animals, whether they're dogs or cats or otherwise. And I think that the way that the procedures are written is laudable. It takes us a great way towards treating this problem in a humane fashion. And so I really congratulate DOE in this effort.
I agree. I support the proposal. And I think it's essential that, as written, that it is taken forward. I think there can be discussion with the committee that Fred is going to work with in agriculture and in the pound, and it can be fine-tuned like that. But I think what we have in front of us covers what we need at the moment. I support it.
I agree.
This is Steve Broadbelt. I think you'd find it's a lot wider accepted if two things were updated. The opening hours were widened, and just a broader definition of humane treatment would be very easy to add a few extra bullet points in there. I don't think that is going to a huge additional effort, and some people may need some guidance. I don't see why that can't be included. That's my only comments.
I would support Patricia and Steve's recommendations, especially if these may go back to legal drafting, and if they have no objection to expanding or making the language more explicit about humane fashion, humane conditions, such that it doesn't end up excluding other things that we may need to consider, or handcuffing us or DOA in future, or the public even in future, because sometimes what is left out is sometimes what is accepted. when you make the language too specific, then you're tying yourself to only those conditions or those scenarios. But I would leave it up to legal drafting, as I'm not a lawyer. And then I would also definitely support in future Fred's idea of having some sort of website, be it under the control of DOA or whomever, for pet owners to be able to access in the event that they have not properly continued their registration through another microchipping service, that it is in fact another local option for them to be able to identify their pet if it does end up in this pound facility.
So perhaps we could then vote on a motion to accept these draft regulations, but to consider improving the language regarding what is humane treatment to include providing food and water.
Providing food and water and keeping in shaded or air-conditioned conditions.
Yes, I think that's in the trapping section already.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, could we have somebody propose that?
I propose it.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Thank you. And a vote?
I'm in
I
favor,
vote.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
I vote in favor. Frank Rollstone, National Trust.
Thank you.
I vote in favor. Tim Austin, Department of Environment.
Thank you.
In favor, Lisa Hurlston.
Thank you.
In favor, Steve Broadbelt.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to record my abstention because this is coming from the DOE. I've had involvement in the preparation.
Thank you.
In favor with the changes.
Thank you. Okay, I think that carried. So, next general meeting, we have a proposal here for December the 6th.
Yes, sir, that's just for council's reference. That'll be the next general meeting proposed unless council has a need to vary it and announce that change later.
Thank you. Is there any other business? No, and then I think we've reached the point of adjourning the meeting. So thank you very much, everybody, for your participation this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Bye-bye.